will shine an enlightening spotlight on defeating Marxism and saving America using biblical truths with author Cheryl Chumley on this episode of United Patriots Uprising with Gary Binford. I'm your host, Gary Binford. Thanks for joining us. The podcast is available at radioinfluence.com or wherever you get your favorite podcast. The video version you can find at YouTube, Rumble, Conservative Television of America, the God Family and Country Television Network, and the Rose Unplugged Media Network. There's also an audio archive you can find at Radio Influence. You go to Radio Influence and United Patriots Uprising with Gary Binford Archive. There you will find the audio versions that had guests such as Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, Kevin Sorbo, Morgan Brittany, Diamond and Silk, Judge Janine Pirro. There's just so many people. Tom Holman. We just had a great time. Pastor Jack Hibbs. So you can go there and find that. Wherever you go, please click the notification button so we'll let you know when the show airs. Leave us a rating and a review, and please subscribe. Most people who have watched this show know quite often I always talk about people will either look to God for their sustenance or government, but not both. So either God's going to be your daddy or government's going to be your daddy. And the problem with government control is if you give control to the government, what the government gives to you, the government can take away. That's why my guest wrote a book about why we must give control of America back to God. Because the reason we went down this rabbit hole where President Trump's election is saving us from coming that close to a Marxist communist takeover, because we have given too much control to government and allowed them to take God out of the schools, workplace, and government. We've got to get him back in. She has written a great book on this topic. Are you ready to hear about it? Well, let's get into it. My guest is a mother of 4 children, Army veteran, and a certified private investigator, as well as a best-selling author, public speaker, frequent national TV guest, Washington Times online opinion editor, and host of their Bold and Blunt podcast. She's here to talk about her just released book, God Given Her Bus, Defeating Marxism and Saving America with Biblical Truths. I welcome to the show, Cheryl Chumley. How are you, Cheryl?
I'm doing great. It's great to be with you. Thank you.
And it's great to have you here. And Cheryl, in true form, in accord with the name of your podcast, Bold and Blunt, you rightfully state the ultimate war in America is our rights either come from God or they don't. On this show, we speak about that a lot because I always contend if government gives you your rights, they can take them away. So please tell people the premise of this. And I'm sure a lot of people have an understanding, but so many people have no clue. They actually think government should be telling us how to live our lives in the private sector.
Yikes, right? So
Yeah.
I wrote God Given or Bust because I'm very happy that we've won politically this election season, but there will soon enough come a time where we lose politically, and we're going to be facing the same battles to reclaim and preserve our individual rights as we did under the last 4 years of Joe Biden and previously under 8 years of Barack Obama. So while we go forth and we make the political battles and we fight for the culture and the economy and parental rights and school choice and all those things, we need to really reorient and realize that those aren't the battles that will give us the ultimate wins in America. If we want to keep our individual freedoms for the long term, we have to get back to putting God in charge. We have to recognize that it's God-given, our rights and liberties. And if it's not that, then it's government granted. And that's why we're facing these dark times that Donald Trump is having to unreel.
Right. So let's go back. Let's take it back. And when I say take it back, I mean take it way back. Let's go back to the founding fathers, because so many people who are, let's say, under 50 have no idea what truly that God, the founding fathers, set this up by Judeo-Christian values to protect our rights is coming from God. And a lot of people think Separation of church and states, leave God out of it, but you can't leave God out of it. So can we take it back to the founding fathers and tell them what they envisioned, how this was supposed to run? Because it just seems to me so many people don't even have a biblical view or even a constitutional view of what we should be. So they have no idea how far out of line we've gotten.
Yeah, because they don't teach civics or truthful history in public schools anymore. So you're right. The younger generations look at the idea of God given rights and liberties, and they're either baffled by the significance of that or they think it's radical. So if you want a quick and easy primer, read the Declaration of Independence, right? That was sort of the marching orders that founding fathers gave us for all that came into being by way of our government. The Constitution, read that, that's good. The Federalist Papers, that's good. But it's in the Declaration of Independence that it's made clear that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're all born with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, right, among them, and that governments are only instituted in order to preserve what the Creator already gives us. So, if you want to understand the roots of American exceptionalism, it is spelled out in the Declaration of Independence, where we get these rights from a Creator, from God. And government is supposed to be subservient, the protector of what we have at birth.
Right. So here's the big question. And you can take as much time as you want or as little time as you want. How did Marxism, communism, and collectivism is like a different, I just throw them all in there. Marxism, socialism, fascism, all the ism, this collectivism. But how did it rear its ugly head and thoroughly infest and infect our nation? I mean, how do we get here? We start with Karl Marx? Do we go to Gramsci? Do we throw Saul Alinsky in there? How do we get into this mess?
So it's not just the politics, right? It really is Marxism, collectivism, which collectivism is for the state, right? Like you exist as an individual only to do well for the state. And the opposite of that is individualism, right? So this is the battle that plays out in America. Individualism versus collectivism. God-given rights and liberties versus government-granted rights and liberties. And the way we have moved away from God-given and into the realm of government-granted is that we have, lost sight of what makes our founding fathers so genius in what they gave us by way of a government, and B, turn down a path of secularism in this country. The farther we turn away from God, then that just creates a void in America where government is only too happy to step, right? So instead of having individuals look to God as the source, as the provider, relying on one's relationship with God in order to provide for self and family, we have ushered in a time where it's more common and accepted to look to government to provide for all. And so as we get more and more secular and atheist, the bigger government grows. And it is no coincidence that your communist countries, your Marxist governments, your socialist governments, they are by and large filled by those who are atheists at heart, because you can't have God-given rights and government-given rights at the same time. They don't coexist peaceably. One has to win out.
Right. Now, you ready to blow the audience's mind? Are you ready? You want to blow their minds?
Sure.
I'm only going to do it if you're ready, because I found this completely fascinating. I had no idea. I'm sitting back, kicking back. I was eating my breakfast, and I'm watching you with Tony Perkins. And when you brought out that you were a former atheist, I almost fell off the chair. And so my question is, as a former atheist, when you were an atheist, how did you view the role of government? And how did you think of people who insisted on putting God above the government? And then when you got reborn in Christ, moving from darkness to the glorious light you're in now, how is it trying to explain this now, having been on the other side, and there are just so few people that seemingly now want to listen?
So it's because I was atheist, right? And I still cherished individual freedoms, largely the type that you would read about in an Ayn Rand novel, right? The Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged, that kind of freedom. And I respected the warnings that were put forth in George Orwell, 1984, Animal Farm. But it was because I was an atheist and still cherished freedom that I can tell you now that I'm not an atheist, that I am a card-carrying Christian, Team Jesus all the way, that the concept of God-given individual liberties and rights is not about Bible thumping, right? It's just about taking a moral compass from a creator, from God, and bringing that into your worldview. So you can still be floundering in your faith and respect the idea of rights coming from a higher power and the inability of government to properly morally compass during their governance. But you can't hold on to those individual liberties and rights for the long term unless you also have a faith. And so as I moved from atheism into Christianity, I realized that yes, for the short term, you can value liberty as an atheist, as a humanist, as a secularist, but it will never stay around for the long term unless you realize that, as founders warned, right, our limited government is only capable of sustaining itself so long as its people are moral and virtuous. And that morality can't come from your own heart and mind because those are deceptive. You have to take it from a higher power. So as I moved from atheism to Christianity, I realized that the long-term solution for America's freedoms has to come from the faith-based community, has to come from the realization that God is alive and active, and he needs to be put at the forefront of American society.
Okay, a great answer. How did you eventually see the light? Because so many of us, as you know, Jesus talks about when you get born again and when you give your life to him and he's now the Holy Spirit inside and leading and guiding you. And so we don't want to believe it, but he says a lot of the people that are going to really put up the most resistance are the members of your own household. And most of us can talk about how many family members, friends, relatives we've lost because they just say, "I liked you better when you were pagan," you know. So how did you find your way? How did you find Christ?
Yeah, that's
Did you have a come to Jesus moment, or was it a gradual?
yeah, it was kind of both, right? Because even now, as a Christian, every day, and this is something that surprises you when you're a born again Christian. Every day, you have to get up and take up your cross, right? You think,
Yeah.
boom,
Well, he
all
says
right,
daily.
I'm good, but it doesn't work that way. So, yeah, I had some very dark times in my life, and that's when God moves, right? That's when God, His glory manifests the brightest, and
Amen.
I did have a Jesus moment from that, but coming out of that, it was almost a logical progression to faith. And one moment I remember, for an example of that, is I remember looking at a leaf, just a small leaf, and then thinking about, as a human, going into a, say, closet, a dark room, nothing in there, nothing at all, and creating that leaf. And that was a come to Jesus through logic moment, that there has to be something greater than just humans to create things out of nothing. And so that's sort of it was a Jesus moment, but it was a logic to faith ongoing progression as well.
Amen. And I'm so happy, my sister, you passed from darkness into his glorious light. Now, you don't have to be a Christian. In fact, you don't have to be anything to understand this statement that Cheryl has made. And I would like you to unpack this for the people. You said, quote, "We have to stand for the right things, even if the wrong things become the trend, become the norm." And that is just so, so rich.
It is. And, I got to say, people who are stubborn in their atheism, when they finally convert to Christianity, they're probably the ones that can live out that pragmatic words of advice the best, right? Because if you're stubborn, you're not going to be moved. And I really think that too many people in America are swayed by not wanting to feel uncomfortable. And if you look back during the coronavirus, right, let's just take face masks for instance. If you believed in the power of the face mask, all right, fine, wear the face mask. But too many people I've found at that time did not believe that the face masks were going to do anything, that they were going to prevent the spread of the virus or prevent them from catching the virus, and yet they wore them as a way of going along to get along. And they played into the deception that the face masks were laws, you had to wear them. Well, you didn't. It was an unconstitutional overreach on the part of government to force American citizens to do something that they should rightly have had their own individual God-given rights to decide whether or not to do. And so if you're somebody who believes in something and has strong feelings about something, but refuse to stand up and speak out those strong feelings about something, it's kind of shame on you, because you're not really doing what God gave you in terms of using the strong voice he gave you.
I hear you. And since you brought up face masks, I've been blessed to have a lot of guests. Actually, over 180 high-profile guests in 4 years. And I'm going to give credit to Professor Nicholas Giordano, who I was on a Zoom with last night for this, because he's the first person that brought this out a couple years ago on my show. And he said he thought the change came in America over the mandate, because previously we could always count on the college-age kids to rebel against the man. They were going to rebel against the Vietnam, they're going to rebel against war, they're going to rebel against this, they're going to rebel against that. And he said there was a paradigm shift, that the college-age students, instead of, no, we're going to go to the bars, no, we're going to go to the beach, no, I'm going to go see my girlfriend, I'm going to go to church, I'm going to go to the clubs, and I'm going to go to class. But they all complied. And he said, we've never done that before. And he said that's when he thought we're in big trouble, because we could always count on the kids to rebel. And they put those masks on and just comply.
The face masks, which I detested, to me were the outward show of the level of Americans' compliance to government's unconstitutional overreach. And I actually wrote the book, Lockdown, the Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom, about the whole COVID crazy that went forth in this nation. And Nicholas is right in pinpointing the idea that college students, normally in their DNA, those are the ones who rebel, right? And
they don't even know what they're rebelling against.
Right. They just rebel for the sake of rebelling. And they were the ones that were screaming at their elders, right, to put your face mask on, put your face mask on. My son was a freshman during the coronavirus years. And when I was trying to help him move into his dorm, I wasn't wearing this silly face mask, first off, because I was outside. And second off, as I said, I detested it. But there were college girls who were standing there screaming at me from feet away to put my face mask on. And I thought, this is what America has become, where, you just have young kids wearing face masks for no good reason, screaming at others to comply. And that's freedom in America. So look, if you're a nation, to get back to the idea of God-given versus government granted, if you're a nation filled with citizens who understand your rights come from God, you don't stand for that. That never creeps into society. So the COVID years were a very eye-opening era in America that shows how far we've strayed from American exceptionalism, the idea of rights coming from a creator.
Yes. Everybody, the name of the book is God Given or Bust, Defeating Marxism and Saving America with Biblical Truth. So let's delve into it. Cheryl, so they get the book, and when they open the book, what do you want them to know? What are the main premises? I don't want you to give your book away, but just tell people, what are they going to find inside the pages of this outstanding book?
So they're going to find first why God-given matters, some of which we've discussed, and some of which I was surprised that, some people think it's a radical idea nowadays. Some American citizens truly believe, in the conservative and Christian camps, believe that the idea of God-given rights, that doesn't exist, that's radical. And so, I had to start there because I had to start with the premise that this isn't radical, this is our founding. And from there, I just take you through some different chapters, everything from the COVID wars to the chips wars to Jeffrey Epstein to Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci, about how it manifests in our nation in the day-to-day when citizens don't take their rights from God, the various ways it plays out, and how deceptions, lies, corruption just seep into the system, and they become so commonplace that we don't even fight them anymore because we don't recognize them as evils.
Were you surprised when churches complied? John MacArthur out at Grace Church in Sun Valley did not, and they sued him. I think he won the lawsuit. Churches complied. I was even stunned, even when churches opened, to see so many people professing Christ and God as your protector that were wearing masks in the sanctuary. I'm like, first off, the masks do nothing, and second off, your protection comes from God. And I always thought we'd make a statement. I never put it on unless I absolutely had to. And I was surprised the churches complied. Were you?
Oh, yeah. Psalm 91, right? People
say it every morning.
Yeah. Psalm 91. That's all I
He who
say.
dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty.
That's right. It talks about God protects you from sicknesses and illnesses. So,
Right.
It made my blood boil, I got to tell you, when I saw the churches close. And when you bring it up now, I still get a physical reaction, because in a nation, right, where you're supposed to take your rights from God, and in a nation where you were founded on religious liberty, the churches have to stay open. It's the churches on top and the government below. And instead, too many churches shut their doors, whereas right down the street, the marijuana shops were able to stay open, right? Or the alcohol stores, or whatever else vices were in that community, allowed to stay open. But the idea that churches didn't stand up to government in mass, there were a few. MacArthur was one. I think Pastor Jack Hibbs was another.
Right.
There were a few, yeah.
Hold on, before we go any further, didn't Pastor Jack endorse your book?
He wrote the foreword for it. So
right, he's been on this show. He's a friend of this show. He's been a guest. I love Jack,
and he's a fighter.
He was talking out, right?
And he's a fighter, and he understands the concept of God-given as well. But the fact that churches bowed down, it really distressed me, because it just showed how far we've turned. Like, wow, we are really lost when churches bow down to a government bureaucrat telling them they had to close. And worse, too, were some of the excuses that these religious leaders in their churches gave to close. They said, well, I want to protect my congregation from the virus. And I thought, well, is that your job? Because your job is to preach the word of God. That's why you're in the position you are. It's not to protect the health of your congregation. And I saw that as one of those devilish designs, 99% truth, 1% lie, right? How Satan is so successful selling his narratives and so forth. But yes, to answer your question, it surprised me, it shocked me, it angered me, and it still does. And if churches ever do that again, then Americans who go to those churches, they ought to find a new church to go to.
Amen. And your righteous indignation is justified. Now, there are people who watch the show, and there are people who live in this country who are patriots who are not Christians. So give them the reason why they should get your book, because obviously you were talking it specifically to Christians, but you're really talking to all Americans, right?
Well, I am talking to all Americans, right? And I'm talking to all Americans from a history, a personal history that includes atheism. So if anybody understands the reasons to be an atheist, it's me. I get it. I understand the draw. I understand what you're going through. So if you're an atheist or a non-believer or just a nun, why should you buy this book? Well, to prove me wrong, right? Read it, and then write me and tell me all the areas I'm wrong in, and I'll show you how you're wrong. Because the fact is, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, this isn't about Bible thumping. This is about the DNA of America, the foundational greatness of America. And that is very clearly that as individuals, our rights come from God. And if you're an atheist and want to dispute that, well, you're welcome to, because you have the God-given right in this country to speak out, to speak your mind.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you handle this one because I actually handle it almost at least twice a month. I only do 4 shows, and 2 of them I always have to put this out. Well, what about the separation of church and state? Well, we can't be bringing the church into the government. I'm
Well,
trying to sound like the people that say that.
yeah, that
Tell them what
that's
the real separation of church is. They don't know.
no, that's it. It's historical ignorance, right? Because it's not in the Constitution. It certainly isn't in the Declaration of Independence. And the people who put that forth are just referring to a letter, right, written by Thomas Jefferson, and they're not doing their own personal due diligence to vet that idea of separation of church and state, to hold it to the fires of truth. It just means that our government is not supposed to establish a church. That's why pilgrims fled the Church of England,
Church
because
of England.
we're not supposed to establish a church, but it has nothing to do with keeping religion out of politics. As a matter of fact, every founding father had some sort of belief in a higher power, and they regularly brought that faith view into their politics.
You're right about that. And people, whether you like it or not, or know it or not, God exists. He's real, and he has an opinion on everything. And God is truth. If he created us, if he created the universe, all truth comes from God. And that's what she's saying. We have to get back to God, because if you really want to know the truth, if you really want to know what's the problem with same-sex marriage, and I'm going to let you expound on that in a second, because God says so. That's the problem, right?
Yeah, and let's stop calling it same-sex marriage, because God defines marriage, right? And he defines
one man, one woman.
Right, that is marriage. So same-sex what? You can say same-sex unions or whatever, but it's not marriage. So, that there's a very simple truth, which I'm happy to say that Donald Trump, by executive order, recognizes as well.
See, that's where you get the enemy. They jump on, like Norma McCorvey. She's thinking it's about her, and she doesn't realize it's going to be about a revolution. The people, well, we want to be married. Now you wonder, now you have men wanting to play in women's sports. This is where these things lead. But here's the big question. As you said, we have to win. As patriots, we have to win this battle, because Donald Trump is... Now that he's in there, we have an opportunity now to finally come out of the closet, those who are hiding, and let your voice be heard and the truth of Christ be put forth. We don't know how long this is going to last. They could be back in there in 4 years, and then we could be heading back into darkness. So we have to get this done and right now. What happens if we don't, Cheryl?
We're just going to encounter the same wearisome, fatiguing battles over and over and over, right? The political winds shift, and then one side's got to dig in deeper and fight hard, and the other side crows about wins for a while, and then it switches. And so, we know this. We've been down this road before. We had Donald Trump, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, then Joe Biden, now Donald Trump. Sooner or later, the winds will shift again, and we'll get a political class that is anti-American at root. And so we need to start making the case, bring it out in the public sphere now, bring it out loud and proud, God-given individual rights and liberties. Start using that phrase and make it clear to politicians that we're not taking our rights from you. We take them from God, and you're there as my public servant.
There you go. The name of the book, God, Given, or Bust, Defeating Marxism and Saving America with Biblical Truth, by my guest, Cheryl Chumley. Cheryl, I've really enjoyed talking with you. Please tell people where and how they can get the book and anything else you'd like to promote.
Great, thanks. So you can get it at Amazon, of course, or at my publisher, which is Bombardier, an imprint of Post Hill Press. And you can find my work at Washington Times or on my Substack, and find me on X at CK Chumley. Thank you.
And how do they get your podcast? The podcast, which is the podcast is associated with the Washington Times, right?
It is, but it's everywhere. Just Google search on Bold and Blunt, or go to the Washington Times and subscribe to it along with my newsletter, Bold and Blunt, there. Thank you.
And what do you do on your podcast? What kind of issues do you bring forth?
I just cover everything from a Christian conservative perspective. I have guests on every time. I just had Jenna Ellis. And we talk about everything from politics to foreign policy to the education system, whatever's in the news.
There you have it. Cheryl, I really, truly enjoyed speaking with you. God bless you, my sister. And keep doing what you're doing. Don't let them grind you down. And God bless you and your family.
God bless you too. Thank you.
You're welcome. There you have it, everybody. Cheryl Chumley. I want to thank Cheryl Chumley for coming on the show and telling us why we must get God back in government, why God belongs in every part of our life because he created us. We did not create ourselves. And all big government is going to do is get more power and seek more power and take more power. And the more power government gets, the less God is paid attention to. We've got to turn away from that. We've got to do this right here, right now, while we have a chance with President Trump in the White House. And we can speak out without fear of persecution. So please check out Cheryl's book and pass this message along to your friends, because it's time to take America back at the roots. And the roots are Judeo-Christian, founding fathers, honoring God, and that our rights come from him, not government. This podcast is available at radioinfluence.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Hope you subscribe to it, leave a rating and a review, and be sure to tell your friends about the show. The video version you can find at YouTube, Rumble, Conservative Television of America, the God Family and Country Television Network, and the Rose Unplugged Media Network. Well, that's it for now, everyone. So I hope you enjoyed the show. We enjoyed speaking to you. So until the next time, this is your host, Gary Binford, saying God bless you, God bless your families, and God bless America.